if they can do all three games, they got it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, see, we've got to head to L.A. and that's what happened last year. That's just dangerous territory for us. And all they got to do is win. Of course, all we got to do is win. No, this is a seven
One.
game.
Yes.
This is a
This
five or
this
seven
is
game?
I think this is 7.
I think it's seven too. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good long ways to go. But we'll
Yeah.
see. We've got a couple of players who've really been playing well. Um, Jocktober with his pearls on, which he has not explained. He's just wearing them. Jock Pedersen,
He's
and
wearing
then
he's
he's
wearing pearls
he's
around
wearing
his neck.
pearls. He's wearing yes, a nice like a lot of them wear big gold chains. He has on a
Hmm.
string of pearls, and
Oh.
but he's playing extremely well, and so is Riley. And unfortunately, poor old Freddie Freeman, who was the hero of the last game, of the earlier series, was let's see, the first game he had 4 outs, his 4 at bats, he was out every time. Uh, he's not having a good thing, but Ozzy Albies is doing really well. So we'll see. We'll
Okay.
see. They traded they traded the Marlins for a guy named Adam. Yeah, I can't think of his name. He's diabetic. He's type 1 diabetic. And my friend Gail, who went with me to Mike Glenn's affair yesterday, has a great nephew who's 5 who is diabetic. And Adam has talked a lot about his condition and reaches out to people about it. And he wears a pump, during games. And so she has gotten in touch with the Braves PR folks. And when the season is over and he has time, they say he loves to do letters and things, to
Hmm.
children about it. And he's going to write her great nephew, when the season is over. So she was excited about that. And I think that's really a neat thing. Uh, she said her nephew's not a big fan, but he sure could become one quickly.
Hmm.
So we're hoping that works out. And I think maybe we've run out of time.
Well,
Uh,
I think probably. And so
Probably.
I
Go ahead.
wanted to see if we could talk about the idea of regional collecting today. What it's about to collect from your region. And an
Yes.
example for me would be New Hampshire or the White Mountains or even New England, because we're so close here. So I
Right.
assume you do Georgia.
Right. I do. Let's do the introduction and get all that out of the way. And
All right.
to all of you that out there who are wondering what in the world we're talking about, welcome to this week's Rare Book Cafe. Available on. This is my grandson who is reading a Cat in the Hat book. So you go back and you can read. Um, he wasn't feeling well, and so he is with me today. Uh, anyway, Rare Book Cafe is the book lovers' rendezvous where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free. It's the only weekly internet program devoted to rare and collectible books and the people who love them, and that's you. We are here on Saturdays at 9:30 Pacific, 12:30 Eastern, and 5:30 Greenwich Mean Time if you figure your time zones from that. Um, be sure to leave us a comment or suggestions or complaints or compliments or whatever, or just let us know where you're watching us from. We'd like to know. I'm your host, Lee Linn of the Ridge Books in Calhoun, Georgia. Uh, Joining me today, uh, well, several people are joining me today. Our resident artist and author of Tangled Shakespeare, Mary Kay Watson, will be with us. Uh, David Hess, with Things Found in Old Books, has several really interesting things today, and including a sonogram of, I think, an Inuit baby in a book about baby names is what I think is what Alan sent me about that. But anyway, David has a number of interesting things today. And of course, on the bottom of your screen is Richard Mori, the Road Warrior. And Richard and I are going to be talking about collecting regional books and ephemera and all kinds of stuff like that. Um, Later in the show, I will have an update on the African American stamp exhibit that our earlier guest, Mike Linn, has put together. It's a virtual exhibit, but Sunday night he had the opening reception and discussion of it and entertainment. And I have pictures and videos from that, and we'll be talking about that. But I think since Richard and I are here, we'll just go right into regional collecting. And Richard's going to start us off with some of his New England and New Hampshire material. And I quickly pulled a pile of Georgia related stuff. And then we can spread out from there. And we'd like to hear from you and your regional authors and things that you collect regionally as well. So have at it,
Well,
Richard.
well, okay. So I've been was thinking about this since Alan and I came up with this idea this morning. So for years, people have asked me, well, how did you start collecting, or why do you collect, or what do you collect? And I don't go into long conversations about it because most people will get bored fairly quickly. So I'll try to keep it succinct so we don't get bored here. So I actually can recall and still own the first things that I bought, and I was about 12 years old at the time. Um, One of them was a book called The Boy Scouts in the White Mountains, and it was by a guy by the name Eaton, who did a series of books with similar titles for different regions. There's one on the Green Mountains, there's one on Katahdin, and it goes on and on. Um, and primarily I bought it because the picture there was a picture pasted on the cover of the book, and it was the scene that was less than a mile from my house of the White Mountains, and it was taken from that spot. So that had a familiarity to me. And I went to my first auction about the same time, and I bought two books. One was the 1928 AMC guide, and if you're a hiker, you'll know what that's about. And the second one was called The Crystal Hills of New Hampshire, which is about the town in which I grew up in, North Conway. So that's kind of where my collecting started. But really what's happened over the years is my customers have actually taught me a lot collecting. And of course, in the days when I was first started, we didn't have an internet. We didn't have books about collecting New Hampshire, and we didn't have a lot of things. And so you were kind of left in the wilds to discover things, which was not a bad way to learn. But in fact, therein lies the the reason why collecting gets to be very extensive. I'm sure you've had people over the years who have taught you things about Georgia, Lee, that you've never seen before, or brought to your attention that you've never seen. Well, that's the same thing that happens to me. But now,
Wow.
after all these years, there are fewer and fewer of those things I've never seen before. But to give you an idea of the things that people can collect regionally, and this is true, I would guess, for pretty much everything, isn't it, Lee?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
That almost everything published or created has a regional context to it if you understand what it is. And I
Right.
think what we may discover today is there's a lot of crossovers um, in collecting. For an example, in New Hampshire, uh, we're rather unique as a state because the New Hampshire liquor stores control the sale of liquor in New Hampshire, and
Hmm.
that literally, all sales of liquor um, are controlled by the state of New Hampshire, and all the profit goes into the general fund of the state of New Hampshire.
Hmm.
So we have New Hampshire liquor stores. So if we have New Hampshire liquor stores, guess what, Lee? We have New Hampshire liquor bottles.
Bottles. Yeah, yeah. Alabama liquor stores, when I was, because I'm from Alabama, I don't know whether they're still state controlled or not, but they used to be,
Yeah,
entirely state controlled.
yeah.
And I think that's been true in a lot of states.
So in
Oh, that's a
fact,
great one.
there is a series of liquor bottles of New Hampshire that are specific to New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Now you may recognize this stagecoach if you ever watched a western that was filmed in the '60s or any of the TV shows like Roy Rogers or Gene Autry, and they had a wagon a stagecoach in the show. Guess what? It was a
That
stagecoach
was,
made in Concord, New Hampshire.
my goodness.
Th- This this is a replica of what's called the Abbott Downing stagecoach, and in fact, um, this was at one time the largest export in the United States to the world. These stagecoaches were exported to every continent between the 1830s and 1860s, maybe 1870s. Um, and they were considered the best transportation that you could buy at the time. And primarily because underneath here in the carriage, they used leather strapping to create the ride. And it's kind of like what we would
Like the
on
springs.
today's car, like the springs on today's
Yeah.
cars. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Well,
So,
it's
so
very
that's,
fancy with that curly
oh,
Q
yes.
uh,
Now I will say
design on there.
this one's
But that
empty,
one is empty.
and I did not empty it. So,
Well,
but
it's
in
okay if you
fact,
did.
yeah, but
Did
there
a did a
there's
did a
go ahead.
particular distillery do the whiskey for
I
them?
I think so. I think most of it is well. This one is Canadian proof, and it's Old
Oh,
Mister Boston. I'm not. I think it may have changed from time to
so,
time. There is markings
yeah.
on the bottom. This was actually made in China, uh, and
Well, of
these are
course,
from
yes.
yeah, and these are from I think the '60s and '70s primarily is when these were done.
Hmm.
But there's one on the Mount Washington, which is the ship that runs on Lake Winnipesaukee. There's an Old Man of the Mountain. There's Daniel Webster is another example. There's a school, the house he grew up in. There's the state capitol. I mean, there's a dozen or plus of these kinds of things. So there's an
Well,
example, not a book, but full of
right,
history and liquor.
right. But now the old man of the mountains is gone, right? The old man of the
Well,
mountains
unfortunately, yeah, the old
slid
man of the mountain is
down.
gone. Matter of fact, I got something here that I was gonna show as well. We'll see how this. So this is a image of the old man of the mountain.
Yeah.
So this specific image is actually very significant. This comes out of a book um, that was published in 1847. This is called the Buford. Buford was the engraver on this. Um, and it was published out of Oaks Scenery of the White Mountains, 1847, I think it was. Um, Originally done in black and white. There is, I think, close to 15 different images of the White Mountains in this book. This
Mm,
is one of the most famous, and I actually had this hand colored. And if you can see the color, I'm trying to stop
right.
the reflection because I got it.
Yeah. You
But
can see the yellow over there on the left.
yeah, yeah, it kind of reflects our fall scenery, which we're experiencing at the moment. Um, and this is one of my favorite favorites, and is one of the most significant portraits. It's one of the earliest, not the first, but is one of the earliest portraits of the old man of the mountain that was published
Hmm.
in 1847. But it to go on, there's lots and lots of things um, that are non-book. I mean, I'm going to show some books, but here's an example. Of course, I grew up in the White Mountains, and one of the things we
Hmm.
do is go skiing. So
Hmm.
there is actually a series of these patches that were
Right.
done by the ski area. This happens to be Black Mountain, which is in the town of whoops Jackson,
Jackson.
Jackson, New Hampshire. And these are done. These are actually silk thread. And so these are kind of very fine, and you get actually with the silk thread, you get a lot more detail than you do in some of the
Mm-hmm.
cotton patches. Cotton's being a little larger and the details less. And of course, I actually have to mention this because one, I'm in Laconia right now. Two, this is one of the older sporting events that takes place in New Hampshire annually.
Oh.
Although this doesn't they haven't been doing a Laconia race now for a few years, but at one time this was a very big a race. It would literally would finish on the main street of town. They would go on the lakes around here and run the dogs. It was a very, very big event at one time. In the 50s and 60s, extremely popular. Into the 70s, it continued, but it's less so now. They don't do as much of that. But that is considered one of the big things in New Hampshire. So, it's an example of the kinds of things that related to books, because there are some books about dog sledding and about skiing and uh, and about the Concord stagecoach or other things. So, but these other items come into it, and I've discovered. Um, I'd like to say that some of the collectors who buy from me are really anal about collecting. And even though I'm the supplier of a lot of the merchandise they buy, I'm not as anal as they are. I just buy everything. So tell me
Yeah.
some,
I
tell me
know
some more.
collectors like that.
Yeah, yeah. So tell me
Yeah.
some more about what you do in Georgia.
Well, I grabbed some things quickly. Um, like New Hampshire, there's a lot of tourist related material. I wish I didn't really grab any of that, but lots and lots of brochures, um, guides to celebrating bicentennials and things like that. But during the 30s and in the 40s, with the Federal Writers Projects, county histories around here became um, real projects. And most of the counties, like in our area, have county histories that date from the 30s, including Gordon County, where I am. And they are not always particularly historically correct, and they're not great works of literature, but it is a start to preserving the county's history. And but even earlier than that, this is a county, a Murray County history. Murray County is one county over from 1911. Yeah, um, that was locally done by a local man, but is now very sought after by collectors because it was a very, very, very small press run, and only people there in Murray County knew about it. But for example, one copy this is the second copy I've had, but the first copy I sold to a lady as a gift for her daughter-in-law to be. Her family was from Murray County, and she wanted the girl to have some sense of where her new husband's family was from. And so she bought some other Murray County related things, but she bought a copy of this 1911, partly because her grandparents were mentioned in it, and so that was it was really kind of a neat thing. And a lot of people who buy county histories are looking for their families, so those have been really popular. Um, we've talked. Let me see what all we got here. Um, One thing that I think is kind of interesting about regional writers, um, there's a fine line between a regional writer in some instances who writes about regional topics but who become nationally famous. For example, Pat Conroy or um, uh, James Dickey. But of course, what James Dickey is remembered for by the rest of the world probably is Deliverance and the movie Deliverance, and not his wonderful volumes of poetry, and things like that. And and a lot of people have seen the movie. Stop it, James. I have a grandson here, by the way, folks. Uh, have seen the movie
We can see them.
all About Eve, and starring Joanne Woodward, and it was about multiple personalities. Very, very popular movie, but I think most people didn't realize that it actually was a book by a partly by a Georgia psychiatrist with the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta. And somewhere here I have a copy of it. Uh, this was, one thing that, well, there we go. It's backwards, but Alan's going to do some stills of this. One thing that the book did and the movie did, was to bring attention to this whole idea of multiple personalities. But it's a regional book to us, even though the movie made it more of a national thing. A lot of historians in Georgia. This is a copy of Negro Myths of the Georgia Coast by C.C. Jones Jr. And the Jones family were very prominent down to Liberty County, Georgia, which is outside of Savannah. Not Savannah, but outside of Savannah. And this is the son, and he collected these are mostly Gullah myths, almost unintelligible to read. This happens to be a first edition, but it's been reprinted many times. But we talk a lot about Joel Chandler Harris and the stories that he preserved. This is a much more, I think, never really got a lot of national attention, but it's the same type of literature. But it's very, very famous in Georgia. I also have some
is there a lot of dialect in this?
That's it. That's what it is.
Yeah.
You just about can't read it. You really can't. And it's mostly Gullah, rather than just African American. It's Georgia coast.
Oh, okay.
And South Carolina coast too, as well. I pulled some postcards. Unfortunately, what I could lay my hands on were Calhoun postcards. This one of them is a hotel, an old hotel here in town, that is now our art center. It has been rebuilt and restored, and this is now the art center in Calhoun. It was the Rooker Hotel, and was probably the finest hotel in town. But we had 4 or 5, when the trains actually stopped here, and passenger trains stopped here, And of course, itinerant photographers would take pictures of local scenes and then sell postcards to like local drugstores and dime stores and things like that. I have postcards of my husband's grandparents' home that were taken by one of these traveling photographers, who then sold postcards to my husband's grandfather, who owned a drugstore. And so we get a lot of that kind of material. Postcards of state parks are numerous. This is Vogel State Park up near Blairsville, Georgia. And I love it because the woman sitting here on the bench, the one in the pink dress, looked like my mother-in-law from the rear. So I've always been very fond of this card. And this is a linen card that's probably from the 40s. Vogel State Park, a good bit of it was originally built by the CCC, as were many of the state park buildings in Georgia. And so I'm fond of that card because of that. Let's see, what else but so people
one of the things that I find interesting is you're talking, and as I've listened to even some of my own words, we pepper our conversations with history. I mean, and in fact, a lot of the history I've learned is through my collecting habit.
Right.
I wasn't born with all this knowledge, and I'm not sure.
Oh heavens!
That's.
I'm not even from Georgia. I'm from Alabama, but I know a lot more about Georgia history than I do about Alabama history. Because I've lived in Georgia since I was 18, and then so much of our early focus in the book business was on Georgia, and that's kind of where we started. But this is, like, speaking of history, this is a little biography of a man who became a lawman. He was from Georgia, but he wound up as a federal marshal in Indian Territory, out in the Fort Smith and Oklahoma area. And the whole story of those federal marshals is so interesting. And so this was somebody from here, who could have been a small town sheriff, but who wound up as in a national force, and then became a sheriff out in Oklahoma. And so it's an interesting. It's called Heck Thomas, My Papa, and written by his daughter. And he was a marshal in the late 1880s and early 1890s. So that was interesting. And of course, I'm sure this is true in every city in the country, but view books. Um, this is a view book of Atlanta, and it is from the 20s, I believe. Uh, Nicely illustrated with um, black and white pictures of local. There we go.
There it
Uh,
is.
Local spots and a good bit of text about them and when buildings were built and their purposes and things like that. And has a nice embossed cover with a little gilt on it. It's an attractive souvenir for someone to take home from Atlanta. And this one has survived with some notes on there of the where they got it. They got it at Scott and Company in Atlanta, and then there's a little handwritten note on there, ownership thing on there too. So that's there are lots and lots of those. Another thing that has been popular are old school um, commencement programs and annuals and things like this. And this is a yearbook from the North Atlanta Presbyterian School from 1916, and which it eventually became Westminster School, which is a very prestigious private school in Atlanta. James, no, I have a lot of help today. So this kind of thing has been popular. I've had a good many from Georgia, but also from Tennessee. The Chattanooga area has had several well-known private schools, and material like this from those schools, Macaulay and some of the others, show up fairly often, and have been things that people have collected.
Well, we have this similar here in New Hampshire and New England in terms of in Concord, New Hampshire, we have St. Paul's, which is a very exclusive private school.
Yeah.
And students come literally from other countries to
Yeah.
attend there. Exeter Academy is very famous
Oh yeah.
for some of their attendees, including John Kennedy and John Irving, who also taught at that school. Um, it's oh no, not John. The Da Vinci Code.
Dan Brown.
Dan Brown, yeah, Dan
Yeah.
Brown taught there. But I do think John Irving actually went to Exeter too, if I'm now thinking about it. But we also have postcards because New Hampshire, we've been doing tourism now literally for 200 years,
Yeah.
not an exaggeration. And if there was ever time to make money, I promise you, the folks from New Hampshire had the angle. Um, and I can find trinkets and things going back to the 1840s, 1850s,
Mm-hmm.
1860s that are hard to find, but in fact are present. But I was just going to show you this is in terms of postcards. I mean, there are literally tens of thousands of New Hampshire postcards. This one is of a flood that occurred in 36, I think it was. We had big floods in New Hampshire at that time, and the rivers, the Merrimack and the Piscataqua rivers. This happens to be the Merrimack because it's Manchester. Uh, and then we have this is a big postcard. You can see by how far I'm holding it
Mm-hmm.
back from the camera. This is the Mount Washington, and on the back of this card, it gives you a little history. And one of the things it
Yeah.
tells you on the back of this card is that this ship actually originally was on Lake Champlain, which is another big lake, but that's in Vermont and New York, the states that lake is in. But in fact, they cut the ship up originally into 20 pieces, put it on a train, and transported it to New Hampshire, where it was put back together and expanded, and a
Oh
new
my
engine was
goodness.
put into it. I mean, you
Oh
can't make these. You can't make these
no, you can't
stories
make
up.
things like that up.
You know,
well,
so
well, Tennessee, Lookout Mountain is partly in Tennessee and partly in Georgia. And, of course, the incline is on the Tennessee part of the mountain. And there are so many incline postcards from the day they broke ground until current ones. You can go to the
mhm,
incline today and buy new ones. But I guess I've had, well, I've sold collections of incline postcards, and I still have incline postcards. And they have a little history of it on the back. There's always something about it. I've had some magazine articles, say from the Engineering News, about the construction of
mhm,
the incline, and they're really interesting because it has changed some over the years. The cars have been changed and refurbished. The route has been changed slightly. The landscaping along the route, trees have been cut down, bushes have grown up and been cut down, things like that. And so over the years, it's an interesting sequence. It would be interesting to do a time, you know,
right.
a
It's
time, whatever you
timeline.
call it, timeline of how the incline has changed over the years. But the basic thing that it goes practically straight up the mountain, and that you're sitting where, if you look straight ahead, you're looking out the ceiling of the car, hasn't changed, and it's still a lot of fun to do. But there were so many postcards from Lookout Mountain. Every every little bit of Lookout Mountain was photographed and put on cards. Every view from Lookout Mountain, the thing that sees 7 states from Rock City, which we never have been able to quite figure out how you could see the 7 states, but that's what they said. And Rock City postcards, and Ruby Falls postcards. But the whole of Lookout Mountain was has been since the earliest postcards, because I have, undivided backs, and even some private mailing cards, really early postcards, from going back, into the 1890s. They have been just thousands upon hundreds of thousands of postcards
Yeah.
there. And Stone Mountain has contributed a lot of postcards as well in Atlanta.
It, and postcards are very, very hot right now. Lots of
Oh,
people are
they have,
buying them.
and they have
Young,
been.
young, young people are buying them. It's really exciting to see that happening. One of the things that we have, because photography has a big influence in the collectors market, and I'm sure for you
Right.
as well. And it didn't start with postcards. Here's a stereo view. Now
View. Uh huh.
this actually this is actually from my hometown. I like to promote, but I grew up in the White Mountains, so I mean,
Yeah.
I can't help
Yeah.
but promote it. But
Yeah.
this is called Artist. I think they call it Artist Brook is what it's called. It's actually a very famous brook here. Um, Benjamin Champney, who was the founder of the White Mountain School of Art back in the 1850s, 1860s. He was an artist out of Boston who would summer in North Conway, and he painted the mountains. And there was a brook right near where his home was in the summer, called Artist Falls Brook, and so that became a very common image. There's several different places that he would do images from in his paintings. This is an example of the photography, and of course, stereo views go back to the 1860s, and this one happens to be an un, unsigned in terms of it. Well, actually, no, we do. This is by N.W. Pease, who is from North Conway himself. So he produced these in North Conway. But again, the one of the most famous producers of stereo views is from Littleton, New Hampshire, and and um, and of course I go through mental blocks. I know this. Um, be, um, I'll get it in a minute. But their stereo views were world distributed all over the
Hmm.
world. Um, but even earlier than the stereo views. Now this is actually what's referred to as a Bartlett, and this is an engraving. They were originally come on. out in book form in 1836, I think it is. And there are hundreds of engravings in this specific book. And the White Mountains were heavily featured. This is actually the famous scene of Crawford Notch, and there's a very historical event that occurs there where the family that lived in the Notch was killed in a landslide. The entire family was killed in a
Mm.
landslide, and the irony of it is the house they lived in was spared in the landslide, and the shelter which they had built specifically to protect them was actually where they were all killed in the
Oh my
landslide.
goodness.
Really,
Uh,
one of those strange historical events. Um, but there are books, by the way, in New Hampshire, right? And I just wanted to focus on some of the non-book stuff. But this is
right.
one of the more famous ones. This is actually a three-volume tome. You can see how big and heavy this is. Um, this is on the geology. This is Hitchcock's Geology of New Hampshire. Um, and it's considered one of the most important books on the geology of New Hampshire, and but in the one of the most important books on the history of New Hampshire was published in 1792, 94, and 96, and that's Jeremy Belknap, who was a minister from Boston, who wrote actually what is considered the first history of New Hampshire. It's a
Mhm.
three-volume set, very hard to find. And the irony of it, that set is very hard to find. And I've actually had it about 3 or 4 times over my years. But here's the irony, Lee. I have bought that title 3 times, and each time I bought it, I have bought 3 sets at the same time. Now,
Sounds like
it
somebody
is
was hoarding it.
well, I don't know, but
Right.
it is so ironic that it is. I mean, I can't remember the last time I bought that set, um, and yet each time I bought it, I bought 3 sets at the
Yeah.
same time. So you
Yeah.
just
That's
never
amazing.
know. Yeah,
No, you
you
don't.
just never. It
And I think every
it
state has at least one history, one set of the state history that is considered the set to own if you're only going to have one. Um,
right.
as far as the older ones, now we haven't had any that go back quite that far, but C.C. Jones history from the 1870s, I guess, has been a classic, history.
Right.
The Stevens history has been, one that's people seek out. I did pull one of the books that I have coming from you is by Lucian Lamar Knight, and of course it's that Stone Mountain poem. But
Right.
he did a lot of history type things, and this is a 2-volume set of reminiscences of famous Georgians, and it's kind of a little short biography and little stories about famous Georgians, and it's a big, it's two big thick, two big thick volumes. Uh, I'm not sure anybody reads it, but they like nice on the shelf. It's an attractive
Yeah.
set, but he did a lot of that kind of stuff, um, and people in Georgia, like one thing you were talking about stereo views. Um, People around here tended to buy stereo views of places like the White Mountains or the West. I can remember in Alabama, my great aunt had a set of Western stereo views that she just adored, just loved. It was almost as good as going out west, she felt like. But I haven't had much from this area. I do have some nice ones right now from Florida that I'm planning to take to Florida, from several different companies that are some are buildings, some are trees, things like that. But a nice set of stereo views from there. But I just haven't had many from like around here, though I'm sure that particularly like the Okefenokee Swamp scenes probably around Atlanta that there are sets sets out there, but local things were not particularly as popular as faraway tourist destinations that people could vicariously visit through stereo views. Everybody had viewers, back in the day, but
Yeah.
the sets that I find in people's houses and things. If somebody calls me and says I have a lot of old stuff and some of it's stereo views, it tends to be from somewhere else.
Well, in the terms of in the realm of one of the more unusual things to be watching for, um, there's a company that actually comes out of Framingham, Massachusetts, called Denison, and they
Yeah.
were a a large office supply company is really what they
And they
were
did all those
originally.
Halloween decorations and things, didn't they?
Well, and in fact, that's one of the things they're most famous for, and their Halloween
Yeah.
catalogs are extremely desirable. But
Yeah.
here's an interesting history. They actually start off in the late 1840s, early 1850s, I think it is, in Maine. And I believe it was near Sanford, Maine, or no, Saco, Maine, or Biddeford. I think it may have been Biddeford, Maine, in that area. But they kind of started growing faster than they wanted or expected, and they moved to
Hmm.
the Boston market because that was had more accessible transportation for distribution of their products around the country out of the Boston market. So one of the things I look for, and I don't know if you recognize what this is, it is the original package with the papers wrap for crepe paper. This
Oh,
and they were well known for
for their crepe
producing
paper. Yeah. Yeah.
crepe paper in a huge variety of colors. But
Yeah.
what's difficult is to find the original wrapping on crepe paper.
Yeah.
So in
Yeah.
fact, if you're collecting regionally in Massachusetts or your hometown is Framingham, Massachusetts, you have to collect Denison because they were such
Yeah.
a big
I can see.
company and so important. And that's just one of the many items I've actually had on Denison over the years. By the way, the name I did remember Kimball Brothers out of Littleton, New Hampshire, who did the
Okay.
stereo views,
But
and they're
they did stuff. Kimball's did stuff national. Did they? They didn't just do New Hampshire, did
they
they?
did international. Matter of fact, between 1865 and 1895, they were the largest producer of stereo view optic
Hmm.
in the world.
Hmm. I've seen. I know. I've
Amazing,
seen stereo
amazing
views
little
by
fact.
them.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
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 They did. They're actually, I believe there are over. It's either 12 or 15,000 different views that they actually produced over the
Oh my
years.
goodness.
Yeah. It really is.
Uh,
But there's also little strange things. Now, here is a puzzle. This is a small version. I have a big version, which I'm going to show you too. This is specifically to New Hampshire's. This company was in New Hampshire. They just actually went out of business this last year um, and sold everything off. But in fact, they produce wonderful graphic puzzles of all different kinds, but many of them were New Hampshire specific. That was kind of like a postcard size, and here is a full poster size.
oh wow.
just to,
uh,
and this is framed and it just this is of a New Hampshire map in puzzle if you really want to go to it. Um, this this just goes to show you you can go get really carried away. But I do have to show you
yeah.
my one of my very favorite, and of course there are lots of maps. Um, in every region, and maps are very important on a lot of different levels, and some of them are extremely valuable and collectible. This is called the bird's eye view of the tip top of Mount Washington, and it's literally this was done in the 1890s, so they didn't use drones in that period to do this. Uh, Somebody visually created what if you were hundreds of feet up Mount Washington, this is what you'd see, and it is in color,
Oh,
and it is truly one of the most gorgeous pieces you can find on the White Mountains. And of course, this is one of my favorite pieces here. You can't probably see it very well, and I'm trying to keep the light refraction. That's why it's at this angle. But that's a Maxfield Parrish image of New Hampshire,
oh,
and these
nice.
were sold. Those were sold in 1940 from the New Hampshire Department of Tourism, and I think they cost all of 75 cents at the time.
Oh, oh gosh.
Needless to,
I
needless to
know.
say, they're very hard to find today. Um, but you mentioned some of the authors that are regionally regional authors who become nationally known. Well, New Hampshire and New England is just full of authors who lived in our states, um, and children's authors especially. One of my personal favorites is C.W. Anderson. Uh,
Mhm,
he actually was in Mason, New Hampshire, who and was good friends and neighbors to another well-known children's author, Elizabeth Orton Jones. And
mhm.
down the road from her, not too far, was Elizabeth Yates, who wrote some wonderful, wonderful children's classics. Amos Fortune being one of them. Is I think it was a Newbery book, and that was illustrated by her good friend and neighbor Nora Unwin, and literally just over the border in Pepperell, Massachusetts, from New Hampshire, is Barbara Cooney, um, and not too far up the road, going a little more north, we had Tommy DePaula, and not too far from
Mhm.
Tommy lived Trina Sharp Hyman, and I could go on. There are even more.
Yeah,
So it and and if you're collecting regionally, you can choose to do a lot of different things.
yeah,
That's an
yeah. You
example of
can.
children's authors. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I have. Speaking of bird's eye views, this is a bird's eye view of Calhoun, Georgia.
Hmm.
But fortunately, though this one is very old, there was a hill, and so you could go up on the hill that was known as Happy Top to get the
Love that
pictures of
name.
downtown. Yeah, we have we have Happy Top. Uh, so Calhoun is kind of nestled down in a little. There's some hills behind the town, but we are actually the lowest point between Atlanta and Chattanooga, and so our hills are not very high. You have to go out of town to get to some better hills, but that's a bird's eye view that did not require imagination. All you had to do was climb up on the hill and take your picture or do your
And
painting.
one of the things we haven't talked about, but you made me think of when you said Chattanooga, was the song Chattanooga Choo Choo,
Right.
and there's lots of got to be lots of songs about Georgia. Uh,
Oh gosh. Well, our state song is "Georgia on My Mind" by Ray Charles.
yeah, right.
It didn't used to be. It didn't used, but it's like uh, Alabama had this terrible, made up state song
Yeah,
that was just awful. But they did away with that for Stars Fell in Alabama. And Georgia had a state song of some sort that somebody wrote, but Georgia on My Mind was much better. It was a much
yeah,
better option after Ray Charles did that.
yeah,
So state songs and state flowers and state birds,
yeah,
all of that. And local publishing or regional publishing companies are interesting as well. The Beehive Press in Savannah pub, did reprints or reinterpretations of some early Georgia books, and then did some books like People of Georgia, which was kind of a compilation of stories about different groups in Georgia. They did books on architecture in various parts of the state, um, a variety of things. And their heyday was really in the 60s and 70s, though I think they're still I think they're still there. But then there was another little press, oh gosh, down on the Georgia coast, whose name I, of course, cannot remember, that did, small press editions of really pretty, really, really attractive little books. Oh, and I can't remember the name of it
Yeah.
because I just this minute thought about it.
Yeah. No,
You
I
know how
know the
memory
feeling.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you my example of memory here too. So in New Hampshire, we have Peter Randall Press, which does a lot of local history kinds of things, and he's done books on Celia Thaxter, who is a very famous New Hampshire author and poet and artist. He's done books on local history and that type of thing, and he's still publishing. Matter of fact, somebody I know just had a book published by Peter Randall, and
Oh.
Pete's been around for not just decades, I think centuries almost. he's he's getting a little long of too. But there's another press which I'm sure you know. You know those little
No,
photo
I don't
album
know.
books
Let's see.
that are being published by with historical societies, and
Yeah.
they've got pictures, postcards in them. Well, that's
Yeah.
published out
Yeah.
of Somersworth.
Yeah.
That's out of Somersworth, New Hampshire, and I'm forgetting their name off the top of my head. And I know I got dozens of their books around here, but none my within my reach. Um, but that's and they've done a tremendous job of actually helping to fund historical societies around the country because they tend to like to work with nonprofits, and because the nonprofits get proceeds from the sales of the books that they help
Hmm.
develop. They do work with individual authors on some subjects, but they do topical books on, like in New Hampshire, there's one on skiing. Actually, there's several on skiing. There's, I think they did one on dog sled racing, and they've done other other types of subjects on the mills of New Hampshire, because New Hampshire and New England just chock full of old mills. So I mean, but they've done a great job in promoting historical uh, societies and its history, and a lot of it is photographic, and they do a tremendous job reproducing those photos.
Hmm.
Probably was
Hmm.
some of the best.
Yeah. Well, a lot of earlier Georgia stuff was published by Franklin Printers in Atlanta. Burke in Macon has been the source of a lot of early Georgia books and pamphlets and this kind of thing. And uh, now Peachtree Publishers is still active and publishes both original work and reprints of earlier things. Um, so some people actually just collect things from that particular publisher. Which I guess is another area of
Yes.
collecting that goes on. But one book that I did bring down is we have felt in Georgia is a poet who did not who died very young and is from up near Blairsville, Byron Herbert Reese, and this is a Song of Joy, one of his books, and his family home has been preserved as a museum up near Blairsville, and with some of the original things that were there, furniture and there's a nice video that goes with it. And we had come across a wonderful photo of Reese at some kind of a gathering of women, and all it said was Atlanta, and it had a date, but we don't know what the organization was, but it was this great 8x10, and he was obviously the visiting speaker, or something, and all these women all dressed up with their hats and everything on, and he was there in a plain white sport shirt, looking pretty much like the picture on the back of this book. And I wish I had known what the organization was or what the event was. And so it was a piece that we donated to the museum up there so that they could have that on display. But he a lot of these regional people, while they're well known in your state or your area, are are did not get the kind of attention that you probably thought they deserved, uh, because they were kind of a regional phenomenon. Uh, I have a lot of Georgia, but I have a lot of Tennessee, a lot of North Carolina, South Carolina, um, some Alabama, and some Florida. Uh, just and then things that are just Southern. You know, books that are just about something in the South, and that it's a wider region. But regional collecting is great, and a lot of times it's an area. If you get real specific, it's something that you can afford to do, and you're not
Well,
looking for extremely expensive signed first editions by world famous
yeah,
writers, and you
yeah.
can put together interesting collections.
Oh, all kinds of fascinating things. I mean, just as a quick example, here's a pennant. This is
Right.
a smaller one. This again, I guess I like promoting North Conway, but here's the world famous ski mobile. Oh, there are only two of those ever built,
Oh
and the
my
first
goodness.
one built in New Hampshire. And I went to school with the grandson of the guy who invented and created that. So makes it interesting. But there's all kinds of things. Here's a quick little piece. This is a piece about I think it's purchases of the Boscawen, New Hampshire Library, which is just north
Oh,
of Concord, New Hampshire, and these are books that they purchased. Um, I actually have tried to sell this to the Boscawen Library, and I can't seem to get their attention for some reason. But we'll try
yeah,
again later. I
yeah.
mean, this is actually from 1908. So, it's not like they've got it in their records. But of course,
No.
there's one thing we haven't talked about is, and I know there is books in Georgia that do this, is the reference material. So this is an
Oh
example
yes.
in New Hampshire. We have
I have
Bent's
two shelves
bibliography.
of that up here.
Yeah, Bent's
Yeah,
bibliography of the White Mountains, and there are dozens. I don't even have my New Hampshire reference books available at the moment, but there are dozens and dozens of books on New Hampshire
yeah,
bibliographies and reference material
yeah,
that if you're going to collect things in New Hampshire, you would need to have. The Bent's was done in 1911, and tells you what all the historical pieces are that you want to be looking for,
yeah.
including maps and other kinds of things. So I mean, we probably could you and I could probably keep talking for hours and maybe days on this subject, but
Well, we could
I thought it would
drag a
be
whole lot of
really,
other stuff off the shelves, that's for sure,
oh God,
and
yeah.
show.
Uh,
But
but
yeah, I think
I hope
has
those,
been fun.
yeah, and I hope those who watch this come to understand a little bit more about what regional collecting can be about. It can be as specific as a town or a subject matter like skiing or golf or whatever you want it to be. Uh,
Yeah,
but I promise you, whatever you choose to focus on, there will be plenty of material to buy.
there will be. I had customers who collected stuff from the Masters golf tournament. That's all they collected.
Yep,
And the
yep.
amount of stuff that has come out of that event over the years is enormous. There are
Oh, mind-boggling.
programs,
Yep.
there are cookbooks, there are
Tickets
reports of tickets. Oh gosh, yes, tickets and postcards and just everything imaginable. That you could.
and golf balls.
Oh yes, yes, golf balls as well. So just about anything, and of course people who go to practice rounds and get things signed. I went to a practice round for the PGA at Shoal Creek in Alabama one time, and it was great fun because the players would sign scorecards or your program or your shirt or anything. And of course they won't do that during the actual tournament, but during practice rounds you can really get some nice things. And that was in about 1984, I think. But
Yeah.
but yeah, there's just something for everyone. uh, and it's like we've talked before, if you own more than 12 books, you're a collector. and
Yeah.
uh, and we bought a lot of books from an estate in Chattanooga a number of years ago, and we knew the son of the man who owned the books, and he was they were his mom was going in an assisted living, and they were trying to downsize. And he said, now my dad wasn't a collector; he was an accumulator. He said he would go, for example, to an antique company in Chattanooga that specialized in English furniture, but there would be boxes of books that came with the furniture, and he would just buy these random boxes of books. And one thing he bought was this enormous set of matching bindings of Punch that went from 1800s up to 1913, I think. And they've been very profitable over the years. They have, but I still have, a fair number. And he had them stored in a basement, and they were covered in white mold. And I don't know how long I spent with rubbing alcohol, and I don't remember what all else was recommended getting them. But fortunately, it was white. It wasn't, it was mildewy kind of stuff. It wasn't black mold, and got them in pretty good shape. And the interiors were good, and the pictures were good. But it was an interesting buy. It was a really interesting buy. But there were just, like, there would be a 3-volume set of something, and he would have 2 of it, or you'd be missing part of a set. But some of the earliest stuff dated from the 1600s in England, and some things like in the 1700s, duties of sheriffs in England, which I still have. Just some, fascinating historical material. And yet, I would describe him as a collector, but his son said he just accumulated all this stuff.
Yeah,
kind of
he
randomly.
was a collector.
Yeah, he was.
It may not have been focused.
It was not very well focused. That is for sure. Sure.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Well, this has been fun.
This has been fun. Yes, it has. And we'll just have to maybe expand on this at some point, because I know we both have a lot of stuff that we could drag out.
Oh, God.
A lot of stuff. But James is having a fit to read a page or two of The Cat in the Hat. Do you want to read some of it? Well, I think this is probably a point that we can let you read a page or two on the screen. You want to do that? With my earphones? Okay. I'm gonna let James do this. Okay. You can slide it. Get in my lap.
We can't see you, James.
Okay. Here we go. Okay. Open
there he is. Has he got his earphones in?
You've got to read it loud enough so that they can hear you. Okay.
Okay, there he is. Hi, James. Can you hear me?
Yeah. And this is James Linn reading from, what's the title of your book, James?
There's a map on my lap.
Okay. Read 2 pages, okay?
Okay. I'm the cat in the hat, and I'm happy to say there's a map on my lap. So let's get on our way. We will travel the world, the whole USA, and still be back home by the end of the day. Maps are drawings that help you find out where you are and get where you're going. No matter how far, when map makers make maps, they must first decide who will be using the map and what it needs to do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, James.
Well, that was great.
Okay.
So,
Thank you, James. And we would hope that this encourages other young readers to read aloud to their parents and grandparents, and even online on occasion. So,
all right. I
yeah.
think I'm probably going to say goodbye.
Okay.
So we'll be in touch and say hello
Okay.
to everyone.
I will. It's time now for our weekly segment from David Hess of Orange, California, Things Found in Old Books. And today looks like a really exciting group of things that David has found. He has a sonogram of a baby from 1994 in a book called Hawaiian Names, English Names. I wonder if one has anything to do with the other. He also has a museum guide to a Keats and Shelley museum in Rome with a ticket, and it has a 1948 stamp included. He also has a brochure on an Arizona meteor that fell from the 1950s. I'm not sure when the meteor fell, but I've been by that site in Arizona. And, we have the National League Championship Baseball Series going on right now, and my Braves are ahead of the Dodgers 2-0 right now. But we're headed back to LA, and sometimes bad things happen. But we're hopeful. We are hopeful. But we've won the last 2 games in the last minutes of the game. But David is a big Dodger fan, and so he'll be rooting as hard as I am on the other side, I'm afraid. So we'll have to see what happens at the next game of that series. But right now, here's David.
Hello, this is David from the Bookman in Orange, California, wishing you a hearty hello. And we are here broadcasting things found in old books. And so without further ado, let's get started with what we've found in old books these past few weeks. We'll start off with Hawaiian names in English. English names. Hawaiian names and English names. And in this book, I found a little sonogram of a baby being in the womb there, and it's from Christy, and a little baby is in there somewhere. I've never been able to look at these things, even when I had a kid, and they had to be one of these. And they say, "Well, can you see the whatever?" And I'm like, "No." But anyway, so Christy left her sonogram pictures in with the Hawaiian names, and I wondered if they ever found a name. And this picture was taken in 1994. So hopefully the little kid is well and almost an adult by now. So welcome to the world. Secondly, in this book, Keats Shelley Memorial Bulletin. So this is what I think is a tour guide or something that they would have handed out at the Memorial Museum for Keats and Shelley. Now, it was published in Rome, and I was a little confused because I thought that Keats and Shelley were like British authors, and I thought maybe that this was a guide that was for a display that went on tour or something. But doing a little further research, I guess Kelly lived in Italy the last years of his life and passed away there. And so they actually have this museum is in Rome, Italy. And I did not know that. And in the book, what I found was it looks like a ticket to the museum. It's pretty worn and torn, and we'll have a nice picture for you. It has a two lira stamp on the back, and I'm not sure why that's there. On the front, it says Keats Shelley Memorial, Plaza de Spagna, 26, Roma. Admission, 200 lira. And it's pretty worn and torn. But and now my guess, the book itself was published in 1950, and the stamp, doing a little research, is from the era of 1948, somewhere around there. So this is a little ticket from the probably late 40s or early 50s of someone's visit to the Keats Shelley Memorial. Still in the book. And on that note, in this book here, the Barringer, Arizona meteorite crater, and kind of the same thing. There's no ticket, but what there is a little tour guide to the Great Meteor Crater of Arizona between Winslow and Flagstaff. And it opens up into a little map, and it gives you a little summary, a little history of the crater. And the book itself is from the 1957. So my guess here is that this thing here has kind of a very 50s look. That the brochure is not dated, but it has that kind of 50s look to it, and it's really cool. I really like this one. Also in the book, and I found a few of these over time, but because it was in this book, is a church visitor. When you go to church, they would hand out these brochures to the parishioners and tell you what the upcoming events are, and so forth. And inside that one is kind of a big one. They probably sent a lot of churches. This inside is the personal brochure from the Broadway Baptist Church in Denver, Colorado, on Lincoln Street, and it has a little phone number. So it's pre-area code phone number, and inside's a little more intimate of that particular church, and talks about their youth groups and their senior citizen stuff and upcoming events. And so it's interesting. It gives you a little slice of Americana of a little church back in the 50s. And lastly, now this book is falling apart. So bear with me. The whole cover is off, and it's just kind of this kind of the softback thing. It's called Fifth Avenue Events, and in the Fifth Avenue Events, it's all about things that happened on Fifth Avenue in New York. And in the book, I found this handwritten letter, also from around 1916. Very beautiful. It's got the monograms of the person who's writing the letter, and we'll get you a nice close-up. But it's written in this kind of style that was very prominent in the 1900s and early 20s, and beautiful handwriting. The only problem is it's hard as heck to read. I had a heck of a time deciphering this one, but I stuck with it, and I wrote it down so I could actually read it to you. It says, "Dear Carl, this book being written around Venice." Now, of course, this is not Venice. This is about Fifth Avenue in New York. "This book being written about around Venice thought would interest you. I forgot if you read French or not. Some very beautiful passages. Awfully pathetic on the whole. Read only where the hump is along." Maybe I read that one wrong. A lot of it makes me cry. Madge. And I'm curious. I wish that the book that she was writing about was also was where I found the letter. But unfortunately, I found it in this book here. Well, it's still interesting. So some book made her cry, but not the pathetic parts. So that's all I have for today. And I want to thank you for stopping by. And if you have anything that you found in a book or that you would like to share, I would love to see it. And it would be my pleasure to share it here on the broadcast. Just send it to oldbook@ebookman.com. No S. oldbook@ebookman.com. Send a picture, a couple of pictures, and a little blurb about where you found it and what it is, and it would be my good pleasure to share it here on the broadcast. In the meantime, I want to thank you for stopping by. It's always a pleasure. This is David Hess from the Bookman in Orange, California, saying goodbye.
We're delighted to welcome back today one of our regulars, our resident artist, Mary Kay Watson, writer of the Tangled Shakespeare series. And today she's going to share with us about a Japanese paper workshop. And I've seen just a tiny little bit of this. It was really interesting. But we are delighted, of course, to have you back. We don't feel like you've been gone. and so tell us all about this.
Okay. Yeah. This is actually from the website Book Paper Thread. And I'll be giving this information, and it'll be posted on our Facebook page for Rare Book Cafe. And the lady who's doing the workshop, I had a lot of different workshops to choose from. And I love paper, and I've always been so curious about Japanese paper. There's just, you go to the store and the art store and you see Japanese paper, and there's just all different kinds of names, and some of it's very tissue thin, but you know it's very strong. You hear that all the time. And I read somewhere that Aubrey Beardsley used Japanese paper to make his book plates when he would draw book plates for people. And that just did it for me. So I've always wanted to take a workshop and learn about Japanese paper. And Book Paper Thread offered the workshop, and it's with Washi Arts. And Linda Marshall has Washi Arts. And you can go to washiarts.com to find out more about her and her papers. But she sells the Japanese papers, and she is doing the course. She is a most generous person. She sent us, it was all of these samples. Everything's labeled, and not just, generous. I mean, the course was worth the money, but it's not just generous with the materials, but it's also the information that she shares. We had one Zoom meeting. The course is all online, and you can, what I did is I just bookmarked it and put it on my screen so that whenever I go in to do some of the studies, I just hit on that and it pops up. And I've gone through probably half of the course so far. We had a Zoom meeting on Tuesday where anyone who had the time, it was 8:00 in the evening. She's over on the West Coast. She actually knows one of our other hosts, Sophia Bogle. And so she's over on that side of the country. And we did the Zoom workshop, and she encouraged us to, do some artwork on the paper. I'm learning so much from all of these people. I learned that there's a glue that you can turn your paper into a Post-it note. And so that's what I'm going to do with my book plates whenever I get a bunch of them done. I already gave my daughter a few today, but let me just show you what I did. I did this piece of artwork, which is pen and ink and some colored, it's not colored pencil, it's Inktense pencil, which is a watercolor pencil. And it is on calligraphy card, which I had bought previously from Washi Arts. And this is kind of a thin, it's a cardstock type paper that she sells. And it has these rounded corners. So I did this. Then I scanned it, and I didn't have my proper scanner here at this house. So I used my iPad tiny scanner, and I scanned it. And then I formatted it onto Pages in iPad. People who are familiar with Mac, Pages is what you use to format things. And I printed it out. I printed it out on this piece of Japanese paper that's called Kasuki Heavy White. She's got the weights of the paper. She goes through the workshop and tells you which fibers are in the paper. We'll have to have her on Rare Book Cafe because she is so interesting. She's obviously been to Japan and studied a lot with the people who make the papers. And so I won't get into that, but we'll have her on Rare Book Cafe sometime, I'm sure, because she's just too interesting. But I scanned it into this paper. I also scanned it into some copy paper, and then I cut them out, and I have my little crafter's round corner clip that I used to clip the corners so that they're nice and round. And the feel of these is nothing compared to the feel of Japanese paper. This is so supple. It's very sheer. You can see through this. I can't remember now which fibers are in this. I think this is a mixed fiber paper. But one thing that I learned about Japanese paper that I just love is that it's very sustainable. The true Japanese fibers that they use, the kozo fibers, are harvested from twigs that they cut from the plant. So the plant's still growing, and in the fall they harvest the twigs. It's not like chopping down a tree here, but I'm sure that if you live on an island, which is Japan, you have to be very careful about what you chop down and how much you chop down. So and this paper is very strong. It's just a great workshop. There's a bunch of workshops listed on the Book Paper Thread website that are all bookbinding type workshops. I'll just read a couple of them off to you. There is a tunnel, flag, and carousel book workshop. There's a hand embossing on paper workshop. Japanese paper for conservation and repair. You can make a storage book. There's a workshop for that in December. So I would encourage everyone to check out the website Book Paper Thread, and definitely check out some of the work that Linda Marshall is doing in her workshop. I'm really enjoying it. I'm learning a lot.
Well, what is a storage book?
I don't know. I don't know. That would be an interesting workshop to take, though, wouldn't it?
Well, I know that when I've had books repaired, frequently on the list of the repairs made, Japanese paper, is described as being used to reinforce hinges and things like that. And I know that some of them are very thin and very strong, and are used a lot for conservator work on books. But that's the only thing that's the only thing I know. I'm in love with your little monster there on the book plate. He's just adorable. He doesn't look very scary. But what is he? Is he a creature that you just drew?
You know what? I study a lot of calligraphy ornamentations in old books. And this is actually something that was inspired by Harry Clark, who I want to do a talk about sometime. He was from Ireland, and he did mostly stained glass, but he also illustrated a book for Poe. He illustrated Faust. He illustrated a copy of Hans Christian Andersen, Nursery Rhymes. The Poe book is the one that really made him famous. But there's another book that he illustrated. He illustrated a memorial to the men who died in World War I in Ireland. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure now about the number of illustrations, but he did border illustrations in this book also. And I think there's maybe been 80 copies of that book that have been found around the world. So it's, it's
Wow.
not an easy book to get a hold of, but I have seen pages from it. And one of the pages from that book has an element up in the corner of the border. The border goes all the way around. It is it's the title page, and it has just these beautiful Celtic knots. And then one of the knots opens up, and there's a creature that you can make out. And of course, mine's a little more stylized. Mine's not quite as, because I'm not a calligrapher, so mine's not quite as lovely. Mine's a little bit. I saw the monster, and I just kind of made him more of a,
Well, he has so much personality.
Oh, thanks.
I really do like him. I really do like him.
Thanks.
Well, it sounds like that's been a lot of fun, and you've still got a long ways to go on it. You've still got part of the course to.
I still have half of the course to finish. Yes. So if I have more to talk about, which I'm sure I will, and she is talking about having another Zoom meeting. She is amazing. She's also going to send us more papers. She said, I forgot to put this into your packet, so I'm going to send you this, and I'm going to send you that. I mean, she's, she is an artist who I've not seen any of her artwork, but I'm hearing from what she's saying that she's also an artist. But she's just very giving. She shares, and a lot of artists don't do that. A lot of artists, they want you to think, oh, it's something I created on my own. No one else has thought of this. But trust me, it's all been done. Everything's been done before. And it's okay to tell people, what you're doing. It's okay to tell people
how to do it. It's like recipes.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't that be silly if I said, oh, I thought this up by myself? No.
Yeah. And it's like recipes. I think it's silly to say, oh no, this recipe has been in my family forever and I'm not going to share it, when you could probably go online and find something, with exactly the same ingredients. It's all been done.
Absolutely.
Well, has the pandemic changed people's attitude towards sharing any, do you think, because we've been connecting in different ways during this time?
That's a good question. I don't really know, because I've been, wearing masks and staying at home, and I'm fully vaccinated and all of that, but I'm still afraid of all these different variants and everything. But so I'm not out there, but I'm also not seeing workshops being offered with the groups that I belong to. They're not offering in-person workshops. So that's not going on. And the people, what I am noticing though, is that people that have not gotten on the internet train, have not picked up the computer, learned how to use a computer, learned how to use an iPad or a Mac, or even their, iPhone or some kind of Android phone, they're kind of being left behind, because that's how we're communicating, face to face. We're getting on the computer and doing a Zoom, and FaceTime and things like that. It is so much easier. I could never get up to, I think she's in Washington, couldn't get to Washington or Oregon to take any of these great workshops. So I can take this workshop, and I think there's about 25 people in the workshop. There's several of us on the East Coast. We can take this workshop because it's online.
Right.
And it's more accessible because we don't have to come to class at a certain time every night to meet like this face to face. She puts it all online, and we just do it in our own time. That's awesome.
Yeah. Even prior to the pandemic, Kennesaw State College, or Kennesaw State University, which is in Marietta, between here and Atlanta, or closer to Atlanta, offered a lot of online classes, particularly in things like using Photoshop, which is one that I took. And you can do it at your own speed, but at specific times you can actually go in and have one-on-one questions and answers, with the instructor. And then the entire thing can be printed out, and the notebook for it is, like 4 inches thick. If you printed out everything
Right.
presented on there, and it's not that far to Kennesaw, but they have to be there at a certain time at night every week for who knows how many weeks. It's just more than most people really want to do, and unfortunately, I haven't used everything I should have learned on it, but still, it was really good to be able to do it that way.
Right. Well, and you're not going to use everything you learn in a workshop.
No.
I mean, I haven't in any of the workshops that I've taken. I've never used everything, but you come away with something.
Right.
And if I came away finding out, well, I can print on my digital printer with this certain paper. And I found out about the Post-it note glue, which I didn't know.
That is amazing. I didn't know such a thing existed.
I know. Just Google it. You'll find it on Amazon. Mine's not here yet, or I'd show you the tube. But and one of the girls at the workshop mentioned that, because my question was, how do you get this thin Japanese paper through that printer? And I had read that you could tape the edge of the paper, and they said, no, don't tape it, but they have this, and they told me about it. But it's great being able to take a workshop like this. And Linda Marshall is very interesting. We have to have her on Rare Book Cafe.
Well, that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
We've been doing well lately with our regulars, but we could, we could use a little somebody new.
Yeah, and I think she would probably do it too. Because she's got, the shop and everything, and she knows Sophia. Maybe we could have Sophia.
Her and Sophia at the same time. That would be
fun. Yeah, that would be
turn them loose and just listen.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be fun. That would be fun. Well, this is really interesting, and
Lee, I would be interested to know if there's anyone who has information about Japanese paper used in books. And because in the 1800s, that's when the Japanese paper started to be exported into from Japan.
I know someone, lady that's done conservation work for me, I know has used it in repairs. Mm-hmm. And I'll ask her if she knows anything about its use in books.
Yeah, because it's been used for end papers and for printing.
Yeah,
printing on. So it'd be interesting to find out. Yeah.
I wonder if Sophia would know anything about that.
We'll have to ask her.
What about your Linda? What would she?
Yeah, I'll ask. I'll send her an email and ask her if she knows anything, because she does have information. One of the lessons talks about the history of the paper being exported from Japan into Europe, and the times that it was used then. And that's how I know that it was used for end papers. And of course, I had read that it was used for book plates by Aubrey Beardsley. So
well,
we'll have to get that information.
I wonder if he did any of. Now I was thinking of Arthur Rackham. If illustrators like that use Japanese papers for illustrations in books.
She had a short list of people who used the paper for illustrations, and Rembrandt used the paper for his etchings. The paper's been used for etchings a lot. So if there's etchings in the book, it's possible to think of Japanese paper that's bound in the book for the etchings. Because I have seen books that have etchings bound in the book.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's really fun to find those. And of course you can tell you have the little border around them, and it just feels so different. And those are fun to find. But okay, well, thanks so much again, and we'll look forward to a continuation of this as you progress through the class.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we'll see you soon. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
You may remember that several weeks ago we had Mike Glenn, former NBA basketball star and super collector of books, ephemera, stamps, anything African American related, on the show to talk about his passion for collecting. Mike also mentioned that he had an exhibit coming up of stamps that featured African American subjects and people that would be available virtually, but there would be an exhibit at the Apex Museum in Atlanta with an opening reception on Sunday, October 17th. My friend Gail, who's in the book club, and I went to the event, and what an evening it was. Beautifully framed and displayed stamps and first day covers covered many walls in the museum, which is in a rambling house and with rooms going all directions. And so I really can't show you the scope of the collection, but just a few isolated areas. The largest item here with the blue matting are John James Audubon stamps and collecting. And a lot of people don't know that that his family were Haitian, and so that he, you know, back in the day, if you had a drop of black blood, you were considered black, and that was one thing that Mike talked about on this, and that there were other people in his stamps that was the case with. But this is one wall. I can't really tell you who all's on there, but the next slide that we have of another wall of stamps includes a lot of baseball stars and a few singers. I think one of the main ones on here was Willie Stargell. Ella Fitzgerald was here. But then in another room, there was a whole display that were all musicians. So it was really, really an interesting exhibit to see. But Mike would pick out 3 or 4 out of each of these panels and talk about the specific ones. This is some of our entertainment. After every little speech that he gave, we would have music. And this lady is Shirley Jones. In the 70s and 80s, she sang with her sisters in a group called the Jones Girls. And then she had a solo recording career herself. And one of her songs, I think it's Do You Need More Love, or I believe that's the name of it, which is what she sang for us, was #1 on R&B charts for a while. Unfortunately, it wasn't a song I was familiar with, but she could really belt that out. She was so good. We really enjoyed that. This gentleman's name is Willie Brown, and he is deaf, though he wasn't born deaf, and I'm not sure what brought it on, but he had been a student in one of Mike Lynn's basketball camps for deaf students, and Willie must be 6'6", extremely tall. There was a kind of a movement to try to get him interested in going to Gallaudet to college because it was a deaf school. But he was offered a full scholarship to Hofstra and spent 2 years there, which was very unusual, for a deaf athlete to have a school accommodate his needs like that with a full scholarship. But decided he wanted to be back home in the Atlanta area and got another full scholarship to finish out his college career at Georgia State. He now does a lot of refereeing with, particularly with youth basketball, and it's just he and Mike had a long conversation, and partly about how he had felt growing up deaf and how he found out about educational opportunities and things like that. And they both use sign language, and Mike would interpret for us to say what Willie had said. It was really a fascinating story. Let's see what we have next. All right, this is the rarest stamp in Mike's collection. A slave who was an accomplished forger, not forging documents, but blacksmithing. Did the Statue of Liberty, not the Statue of Liberty, But the Statue of Freedom that is on the top of the Capitol, which is rather ironic that a slave did this. But this is a stamp in his honor that was done by the Postal Service in the late 1800s, which was also very, very unusual. And this is the rarest stamp in Mike's collection. We had an interpreter, a sign language interpreter, for the entire program. She's retired, but she's, Alan and I were talking earlier, we think there's a group called Friends of Mike because there were so many there. And she comes out to do it for his events. And what was fun to watch with her, and my daughter-in-law is a sign language interpreter, and so I had watched her. What was fun to watch was her facial expressions. And because we had musical interludes, she was interpreting the songs and almost dancing along with them. But she was a lot of fun to watch, and really seemed to know her job. And here I am at the end of the show with Mike. He is holding, which I'll show you in a few minutes, a book of his that we all got copies of that's called My Next Shot Goes In. And it's a motivational book written for basketball players, but it's the kind of thing that anyone who is setting out on any kind of endeavor would find helpful, because the chapters include accept the challenge, focus is the key, make your thoughts as big as your dreams, enjoy the journey, take pride in your body and invest in yourself, build your strengths, defend your weakness, never blame, always build good relationships, faith, and let the universe handle the details. And my friend Gail and I were looking at it this morning, and we thought it was really something that anyone who is endeavoring, particularly to take on a new challenge, that this would be a good book for them to read. So this is My Next Shot Goes In. It's not new. It was written in 2014, and some of the players that he has pictures of in there are people who are now retired. But it is an interesting book, and one that I would recommend. So we have a few videos.
Manner in which you speak, by the way you employ your leisure time, by the use you make of every dollar or dime. You tell what you are by the things you wear, by the spirit by which your burdens you bear, by the kind of things at which you laugh, by the records you play on the phonograph. You tell what you are by the way you talk, by the manner in which you bear defeat, by so simple a thing as what you eat, by the books you choose from a well-defined shelf. In these ways and more, you tell on yourself. And I thought that's a wonderful poem, and I added a paragraph myself, a very short one. By the memorials you collect from heroes of yesterday, their spirits, images, and mentality with you will stay.
Well, now that we've seen Mike, I'll tell you what we were looking at. He said that his mother had a copy of this poem, which is called You Tell on Yourself, an anonymous poem, that she had a copy of it on the wall in the kitchen, and that he saw it every day, and that his mother thought that it was something that you really should live by. And when I started doing the video, I missed the first line of it. The first two lines are, you tell on yourself by the friends you seek. And I think Mike came in right there on the end of that second line. But he opened the presentation with that. And the next slide, the next video that we have, this gentleman's name is Al Chauncey. He was a local Atlanta singer. And he sang a song about voting and about going to the polls and voting. And this is just a little snippet from it, but I think it kind of gives you an idea of what the song was like. It was a lot of fun to listen to.
Hold on, hey, hold on. Now my name is Al Chauncey, and I'm a Cancer.
And come January, I'll be going through the polls and casting my ballot. We also have voting here in Atlanta coming up real soon on November 2nd, I think. Yes, it is. So I need you to vote on. Yeah, I need you to listen. Goes to the poll. Hey, hey, and you.
The third video that we have tonight is Mike's longtime partner as color commentator for the Atlanta Hawks, Jerome Jurinovich, who now works for a radio station in Atlanta, but I couldn't tell you which one. But anyway, he talked a little bit about their years of working together and what a good time they had, and how well they worked together, and a little about the importance of what they did, that they were not just calling a basketball game.
Us in LA oversaw 22 different teams and said we had the best. Yeah. And I just thought they were throwing compliments at us, because they surely didn't pay us that way, did they? Oh, you're right. Yeah. I went back and watched, and I agreed with them, because Mike and I not only had an extensive knowledge of the history of basketball, but also a love for all sports, a love for history, and a love for American culture. And when I used to watch our shows, it wasn't just about X's and O's. It was between his knowledge and my quick wit. There was a little bit of love and laughter in those shows, which made it really entertaining. And so, even though he played for years in the NBA, I never considered him a former player. I think Mike is a history teacher, and tonight's a perfect example why. Every time I come to one of these events, I learn something. And he said, hey, come out tonight and introduce me. I said, absolutely.
That's the end of our show for today. I need to show you one more thing before we close, and to tell you about next week. In addition to Mike's books, we also got Mike Glenn t-shirts. So I'll stand up so you can see. Can you see my t-shirt? There we go. There's a jump shooter in the house. Mike was known as the Stinger when he played. His number was number 34. And so this is my Mike Glenn t-shirt. Everyone got these last night in addition to his book. And so that was fun and a nice thing to wear on the show today. Thank you so much for being with us this Saturday, and we hope every Saturday. Don't forget to leave comments, things you like, things you'd like to hear, questions that you have, and we'll try to get back to you. Coming up next week on the show, Larry Rakow from Wonderland Books in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, will be back. He and his wife, Susan, have been vacationing in Colorado and has sent us pictures of them at one of the national parks in Colorado with the mountains in the background. Looks like it was a wonderful trip. Larry will be talking to us next week about what he's calling collecting on the fringes, collecting things that are peripheral to the actual book collecting, posters, ephemera, buttons, things like this. And of course, as you probably remember, Larry's field is children's books. And so we're looking forward to having him. And my book club meets this coming Sunday night. And we're reading Nomadland, which was also made into a movie, which won a number of Academy Awards, starring, oh my heavens, Frances McDormand. And that should be a lively discussion. One of our members knows a woman. Janice had been a volunteer at Yellowstone and met a woman who was working at Yellowstone during the summer season, who lived in her van, traveled from job to job, and was doing the kind of lifestyle that the folks in this book were pursuing. So that should be an interesting conversation there as well. And so I think that's what we have for next week. We'll also have, of course, David Hess with Things Found in Old Books. And remember, if you find something in an old book, send it to David. So that's all for today. Thank you for joining the Rare Book Cafe, the Book Lovers Rendezvous, where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.